Cheers, guys. Epix911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for Wednesday, November 23rd, 2016. Let's jump right into VR, guys. Start with the usual bit of preamble. I want to talk about work that I've been doing kind of for the channel, not on the channel, but to kind of help things along. There was a viewer, you know who you are, forgot your name, I tried to find it, and more on that in a second. But he had the suggestion initially for, possibly a forum, a message board, a place for viewers of this channel to get information, where we can pin awesome resource links. An example of that, Sanosuke 1981, again, viewer of this channel, links on the high definition patch for Doom 3 BFG. That stuff gets buried pretty quick in the comment section. So by Sunday night, I'm almost done. I hope to have the forum launched. So anybody who's interested, I'll talk about it again. And yeah, you'll be able to check that out. And I'll start populating it with past links. And then, of course, housekeeping moving forward to ensure that those resources are in a spot where you can find them. Maybe even include like a trade section. If you guys kind of like a mini Craigslist just for VR. So look for that by probably Sunday evening. I should have that fully ready to launch. Next up, let's talk about Locomotion. So again, longtime viewers of the channel, check out the timeline. You might not want to listen to this because you've heard me go on about this multiple times over the last few months. But anyone who's new, just kind of my take on Locomotion. A lot of times I report the news, it's in a neutral state. You read the news. Sometimes I'll offer up an opinion on something, etc. With Locomotion, I pretty much said from day one there should always be 2 forms of Locomotion per game or experience. That's kind of evolved. Now I think there should just be multiple options. It could be as easy as having smooth Locomotion and then an option where the gamer could adjust the turns or movement in degrees. Well, for turns anyways, 15-degree chunks, etc. I'd be okay with that. We're never going to be able to make everyone happy, but if we can make the majority happy, that's pretty cool. The other example would be where, let's say it has to be teleportation and nothing else can be done, budget-wise or whatever the reason. It doesn't matter. Just assume nothing else can be done. Then yes, go with the version that's going to benefit the majority, or in this case, the minority who possibly are getting sick and nauseous. I'm okay with that myself because really good games, there's probably going to be hacks that come out that improve Locomotion. But where possible, have options. Because you can read the comments from yesterday, how many people specified that Doom 3 was just an absolute no-go. One viewer, get this, he only played 10 frickin' minutes of Doom 3. 5 hours. He was sick and nauseous and couldn't do anything. And that's just not acceptable. And it sucks. So that's my take on Locomotion. All right. Next preamble piece. 50+ launch titles available for the Oculus Touch next month when it launches. Absolutely stunning. Yes, there's cruft in there. Probably a lot of cruft, but from what I've seen, there looks to be some quality stuff in there too. So can't wait, A, to get my hands on the Touch, and B, to start trying some of that stuff. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before I go into the news has to do with 2 viewers responding to my request for feedback from those of you who play social VR games or experiences, I guess you want to call them. And 2 specifically did just that. Appreciate that, gentlemen. Daren, Lacey, and Andrew Heath. Check out their write-ups. I won't be able to do it justice just talking about it. But they provide an excellent snapshot in their own respective social VR application on what you can expect. The things you can do. And it got me to the point where, I'll try it. And you heard what I said yesterday about that if you watched yesterday's video. So Daren, Andrew, thank you. Again, another example of where that would be great to have that kind of a write-up in a place where we can find it and it doesn't get buried. So let's move on to the first news piece. And let's talk about my former employer, Electronic Arts, the evil empire. No, I don't. I don't think that. I always talk about waxing nostalgic for Trip Hawkins era EA. That's my personal favorite because those are the games of my childhood, right? My teenage years, etc. But in all seriousness, they sent a letter, and I had a heads up on this, having worked there. That's why I didn't talk about the Command & Conquer Red Alert. Didn't do a video on that, specifically dealing with in-depth stuff. It sucks. There's no two ways about it. Let's just cut to the chase. It sucks. And I believe the guy's name who's creating it was Adam. But yeah, he basically got a cease and desist letter. And it's not like they weren't polite about it. They were polite. Well, as polite as you can be when you're speaking legalese, right? But I'm going to read it for you guys. Dear Adam, thank you for your interest in Electronic Arts, Inc. EA appreciates the passion that players like you have for our games, and we're always excited to see the creativity that comes from our community. While we appreciate your enthusiasm for our Command & Conquer Red Alert games, we are unable to authorize your request to distribute a remake VR version of our Red Alert 2 game, regardless of whether it is commercial or not. We greatly respect our fans and hope this response does not diminish your interest in our games. Kind regards, Permission Requests Team. Now, my personal opinion, it sucks. But with that said, I understand why they did it. But really, couldn't there be an exception made if it's not commercial, if nobody's gaining from this other than people who love Red Alert and VR, they get an experience, right? I kind of like the way Minecraft did that. I don't know how many of you remember, but there was a Minecraft version for the HTC Vive. And the owners of Minecraft now, instead of just sending a letter like that, they basically said, yeah, it's fine. But we are eventually going to come out with our own, and when we do, at that point, we'll ask you to take it down. And they kept that word, and they did exactly that. And in the meantime, everybody was happy. So again, I understand why they have the legal right. It's their IP. Case closed. But feel they probably could have made an exception here, And it wouldn't be a dangerous precedent. It would just be an exception. One that would have worked. Next up, Alien Isolation. Is it the best VR horror game you've probably never played? And I haven't played it, but it looks great. It looks like it has a really good mix of psychological terror and, of course, your standard jump scares scattered all over the place. But those people lucky enough to try it on the DK2, Sega had left some VR code in there, experimental albeit, but almost everyone that I've spoken to, interacted with, that played it, said it was really, really good. So, yeah, it's a shame. Hopefully, like with Doom 3, something can be done. That is a game I will definitely try. Next news piece, the immersive industry moves closer to universal access as Steam announces OSVR support, and that's open source virtual reality. I've talked about that company, their unit, multiple times over the last 5 months, just the whole open source aspect of it, and we kind of know what Oculus's stance was supposed to be, and they kind of haven't gone in that direction, which again is their right. But it's nice to see that Gabe and his team, can take time out from their busy swimming in their vault filled with gold bars schedule to do stuff like this. Because, it's working with devs. It's camaraderie. And the ability to have that open source and be on Steam, I think, is huge. Those who purchased an OSVR, and it was something that was on my horizon and probably something I'll still look at getting, when I can work out the logistics of it to actually make it happen. Because as you guys know, I've spent quite a bit on VR this year already. So yeah, probably gonna have to let a few months go by. But anyways, I've got the link, guys. Have a read of that. Very cool to see that relationship on Steam evolved to that point. Again, this next news piece, a perfect example of the awesome of this channel for me, what I get out of it. AVAT AVAT VR, he's another longtime viewer, always posts, good links, good information, and he did the same here again. This one was just more of an interesting story, and it has to do with Japan Display Inc. showing off their 651 pixels per inch display for virtual reality. Now, anyone who's been following the high PPI players and what they've been up to, they'll know that there was a Samsung one back in May of this year that was in the 800s. So it's not new, it's not groundbreaking, but it's nice to see others going down that path, because that is some crazy, crazy small pixels and would do a hell of a good job of helping to eliminate, not eliminating, but reducing substantially the screen door effect that a lot of people have. Next up, HTC. This is a really interesting story. There's two parts to this. Now, they've confirmed, first of all, HTC has confirmed they're selling their Vives at a profit. Historically, what happens, for people who don't know, console makers generally spend the first little while selling either at break even or with a loss. The thought and the hope being, and it usually works out that way, that components are going to get cheaper, the adoption rate is going to be high, we'll make our profit later. In the meantime, we get it through publishing and etc., other means. So that was interesting that they are selling with a profit. That also tells you that there's probably wiggle room, right, for reductions ahead of schedule. And it might be the reason they were okay with $100 when some other companies weren't. I think it's a good little caveat, a good little carrot. If you were that close to buying one, $100, yeah, why not? Grab it. You can put that into games, whatever. I do think, however, that as we get into 2017, we're going to see more kind of natural drops in price that won't be necessarily holiday or tied to a holiday. It'll just be a reduction in, component pricing, especially when Microsoft launches their supposed 299 units or $299 HMDs with the people in their alliance. That will be an interesting one to watch, to see what happens with the pricing for HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, and hell, even PlayStation at that point. The next interesting point of this article is HTC basically addressing the whole 140,000 units sold stat. And I reported that back in the summer. And at the time I said, look, you take them both together, the sales are pretty damn good for such a costly item. And I used examples like the Sony PlayStation. It only, it took 18 months to hit the million units sold mark. So with all of that said, it doesn't look bad. But anyways, HTC President Chi-Ling Chang made this statement. Right. So I think this is a good question, because I also read reports about the 140,000 unit sales figure. I actually talked to somebody on that, and I don't know how this 140,000 number came up. I can confirm to you here that while I can't tell you the exact number, that it is much higher than 140,000 units moved. What does much higher mean? What do you guys think much higher? Is much higher 10, 20, 30,000? Is it almost double? My best guess, if you're going to say much higher, I would say probably closer to 200,000 units at that point, which would have been the summer. So interesting. Link included. Check that out if you're interested. Next news piece. This is the interesting one, guys. Back to the Oculus Touch. There is now officially going to be a global back order for any new pre-orders. So if you're doing one from today on, expect to see it 10 to 15 days after launch. kind of makes sense why they picked December 6th. Now, it gave them an opportunity to, have additional production runs ahead of Christmas and allow people to actually get it in their hands at the right time, which is that magic mark. So, yeah, very interesting that it's come to this. So my curiosity is, how many units did they have available to meet that December 6th target date? And now that it's come and gone, there's that 10 to 15 days back order. And keep in mind, this is just their store direct. This doesn't take into account Best Buys and others who had, prearranged their own volume of units. And there's a few of those. I think Walmart's another store. So there's a few. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Last news story, Daydream Ready Phone minimum requirements detailed in Android documentation. And these are really neat. So this is their kind of recommended requirements for developers on their platform, on the Daydream. Requires at least 1080p, but they strongly recommend 1440p or higher. A screen that's 4.7 inches to 6 inches diagonal. Must maintain 60 hertz in VR mode. And regarding pixel switching, gray to gray, white to white, white to black, and black to white switching time under 3 milliseconds. Obviously, latency issues there, which reduces image blur in VR with less than 5 millisecond persistence. It should have 2 physical cores and an exclusive core dedicated to the VR application, not allowing any other processes to run on it except for that one. And it doesn't get into any more like the exact clock speeds and things, but interesting document all the same. That's a pretty good quality benchmark to set. I think they set that just right. I think you go too low and you risk, getting on the wrong side of the immersion equation. So I think those are pretty solid specs. They're high specs, but they're manageable. Basically, phones from today onward are probably, for the most part, going to at least have the potential to be Daydream ready phones. All right, guys, that's it for VR news today. As always, cheers. Off for some high definition Doom 3. It's going to be fun. Cheers, and definitely catch you guys on the VR flip side.